Hello, fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. I'm going to continue ranking the books that I read in 2024. The last video I did the bottom 10. Now I'm going to do the middle up to the top 10. So let's jump right into it. Number 38 is Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer. This is the third novel in the Southern Reach trilogy, which is now a tetralogy. I did talk about two of these novels in the last video. If you haven't seen the last video, it's the bottom 10 of this ranking. Make sure to watch that before you're watching this one. Acceptance was a better read for me. Authority really was a slog through much of it. This one was like half and half. Not even, maybe like 40 slog, 60 really enjoyable. And man, the final thoughts, and he doesn't present one obvious, here is what Area X is. He presents a myriad of possibilities, and all those myriad possibilities are mind-bending and wild. In many ways, I would say that it is absolutely worth it to read the entire trilogy, the first three books, just to get a complete concept about what Jeff Vandermeer was trying to say with Area X. There's some slog in there, but it's really wild how many possibilities he puts forward for what Area X could be. Number 37 is a recent read. I was just finishing this up through the last bit of December. Haruki Murakami's The City and Its Uncertain Walls. This novel felt to me like a retrospective on Haruki Murakami's career. Every part of this novel that I read felt like a nod to another one of his novels. It was good. I was entertained. It got a little boring in the middle, but not too bad, and picked up pretty quickly. So I don't really begrudge this one its length, like I do a lot of other Murakami books. Yeah, it was fun, but I feel like there's other. This isn't necessarily a place to start with Murakami. This is a place to end with Murakami, in my opinion. I haven't done my deep dive on this yet, so you can expect a deep dive in the coming weeks of this one. Next up is This Immortal by Roger Zelazny. This is Roger Zelazny doing a scientific retelling of Greek myth stuff, and that's not completely true. He just uses... It'd be closer to like Percy Jackson, right? Where he uses Greek gods as kind of almost an office somebody can fill, and it's only one of them. So I think this was really cutting edge when it came out, and I think it did. I think this is the one that tied with Dune for the Hugo or something. It was, I think, really badass and cool when it first came out, but now it's kind of like the Beatles. This concept inspired so many people that young adult fiction is now flooded with this concept. A lot of great ideas in here. We're kind of to a point in the list where everything on this list is good from here on out. This was, in the typical Roger Zelazny way, confusing about how it introduced characters and had a lot of characters. So at times it was hard to tell who was who, and that always kind of bugs me because it makes it so that the complication of the story is just remembering who's who instead of trying to understand the deeper themes the artist is putting forward. But overall, I like this better than Lord of Light, and it really, I think, is important for being the first of the Zelazny's to do the mythic retellings that he became really known for. Although I think for mythic retellings, it might be For a Breath I Tarry. I don't know. But anyway, This Immortal. Next up is The Whisperer in Darkness by H.P. Lovecraft. It's a novella or a novelette. I can never tell the difference between those. It's in my copy that I read was in this Ballantine. I think this is a Ballantine. No, this is a Lancer. In this Lancer book with wraparound cover art. that's called The Color Out of Space. So it's The Color Out of Space and other stories. I do plan on getting a hold of Grammaticus. He and I talked about doing The Color Out of Space from this together, and I would love to do that. And I'm hoping to do that in January, so I'll be getting a hold of Grammaticus and seeing about that. This went a little long in my opinion, but was still an incredible creepy story. Just, yeah, classic Lovecraft cosmic horror. It was a really good time. That was number 35. Next up, number 34 is Night of Delusions by Keith Laumer. I'm lucky, I think, to have a signed copy of this. Yeah, signed by Keith Laumer. This was a novel that was recommended to me by somebody on the channel, like Demon Breed was. But this one was wonderful because I was trying to chase down a science fiction trope of the dream machine, and this fell into that trope, and it was really fun. At times, it was a little too much spy novel for me. It started as kind of this private investigator thing that I wasn't really truly a fan of, but boy, this went mind-bending pretty quick and was a really, really good time. Number 33 is Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, a novelette that the movie The Thing from Outer Space, or whatever it was called. I can't remember what that 50s movie's called. But eventually, it became John Carpenter's The Thing. This was a really enjoyable story, and I think we could call it a Golden Age story. I know that John W. Campbell was hugely influential on the Golden Age of science fiction. And here we have the intelligence of man overcoming these kind of bestial aliens that I've come to associate with John W. Campbell. But it is a classic story, and it really kind of had some great cosmic horror. The characters were all very smart and were problem solving throughout the novel, and it was very, very enjoyable. Really, really fun read. And I do think that in the long run, it's better than the movie, this one. But that movie is so good. Scared me so bad when I was a kid. Number 32 is The Final Program by Michael Moorcock. Had a lot of fun with this. I really liked the weaponized hallucinogenic drugs. Made for some really trippy passages that I really enjoyed. Michael Moorcock's prose is incredible. I felt that this was a little dated, which is unfair to say about this because it was written before the stereotypes of the era it was about were even formed. Michael Moorcock was really he had his fingers on the pulse of the underground, and it was very, very cool. But at times, just for the reading experience, it got, I don't want to say silly. You had to hit these tropes that have become now to be really associated with the era, the late 60s, or the mid 60s that this was about. But the whole time you read it, if you remember that Michael Moorcock was on the forefront of this, it makes it so much more interesting. It's a really good time mind bender of a novel. Number 31 is The Lath of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is another in the dream machine trope. It's interesting. I for the first couple of times that I read Le Guin, I DNF'd the books, and this is one of them. And I don't know what it was. I had a harder and harder time picking it up through the first part. Her prose makes me feel like I am very far away from the story and the characters, and that's really difficult for me. I think she does a thing with psychic distance that makes it really hard for me to connect with her characters. But, and this happened twice, and we're going to talk about it one right after the other here. Once I picked it back up and started again, it was one of the best reads I've ever had. So I find that in some of the work, and this is Ursula K. Le Guin's going to be on here a lot. I read a lot of Ursula K. Le Guin. Some of her work has a tendency to alienate me at the beginning and then really just kills it through the second half. And this was one of those wild story, a story that considers what it means to have somebody be able to dream things and those things come true until the whole world falls apart into chaos. Really, really wild stuff. Like I said, we'd be talking about this again. Number 30 is A Wizard of Ure by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is her fantasy epic. It was originally written for young adults, but I think that Ursula K. Le Guin considered kids much smarter than society thought, and so really wrote these as regular adult fantasy. Again, I DNF'd this halfway through. It just got harder and harder for me to pick up because of that distance. And then, just like Lath of Heaven, when I picked it back up, it blew my mind. This is a classic. This is a great story. It is the beginning of what I think are better and better stories. So you'll be seeing more of this as we go through. Number 29 is The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. A collection of short stories that were inspirational to H.P. Lovecraft and his cosmology and cosmic horror. This stuff is really incredible. It was written in the late 1890s, and I think is one of the earliest of weird tales style writers. Really incredible stuff. Introduces the concept of the King in Yellow, borrowed Carcosa and Hastur from Ambrose Bierce, and just started this weird tales kind of fiction, I think, very early. What a fun ride this was. Not all the stories in this book connect, although more connect than I believe most people do. There was somebody that commented on this, one of these videos recently, that said, I really want to find connections in every one of these stories, and I felt the same, and I was able to do it through most of them, but the real romance stories at the end, I wasn't able to connect to the King in Yellow. Hopefully that person that commented will be able to and tell us what he thinks. 28 is Whipping Star by Frank Herbert. When I first started reading sci-fi, when I decided I really wanted to read a bunch of sci-fi, I started with Frank Herbert, but I started with non-Dune Frank Herbert. And this is one of them that I read, and then I reread it for the channel. It's a really interesting take, and the best part about it that I can remember now looking back on it is the descriptions of the aliens were so good and so wild and so weird. I think that I know that we don't see aliens in Dune. I think everybody's, except for like animals like the sandworms and stuff, everybody that we meet in Dune are humans that have been either evolved differently or have been affected by the spice. Here we just see Frank Herbert with tons of different aliens, and man, he makes some weird and interesting aliens. Definitely worth a read. Number 27 is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. This is classic Murakami. I remember waiting excitedly as this one came out and going to buy it when it was finally released in English. Very, very exciting for me and the group that I hung out with. And it fills all those kind of Murakami bingo concepts that we expect. It is one that you have to really dig into. I think Murakami always asks his readers to be a participant in the experience. That you can't just read Kafka or you can't just read Murakami and expect to get it all. You have to take the concepts that he gives you and use those to unlock the mysteries of the stories. And this is one of those. One of my favorite Murakamis. I really enjoyed it. The only reason it's not higher up, and this is going to be true for all of these from here on out, the only reason they're not higher up is because I enjoyed the other ones a little bit more. I'm to the point now that I can recommend all these very easily. Number 26 is The Futurological Congress by Stanislaw Lem. I know a lot of people are going to be shocked that this isn't higher up, but again, we're to the point now that I feel like everything we're talking about are just incredible classic books that I had to put in some kind of order. The only reason that this isn't higher up is because I feel like the first half of this and the second half of this are two different books. And the second half of this is so good. And the first half of this is that kind of punny, witty, abstract humor that sci-fi has a tendency to go in sometimes, which I'm not as huge of a fan, and that's just my personal taste. But this book is 100% worth a read, and the second half will blow your mind. It is the coolest use of hallucinogenics as a weapon I've ever seen in books, and it is wild, and as the layers and layers are peeled back, just absolutely insane. Great book. Next up is The Farthest Shore by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is the third novel in the Earthsea trilogy, and really kind of wraps it all up. In many ways, this is a similar story to the first one. And also kind of an interesting... I see echoes of the Arthurian legends in these, or in this specific one. So, yeah, really enjoyable read. A great story. Lots of this story was taken in the recent Tales from Earthsea movie that was made by Studio Ghibli. Really interesting stuff. Next up is The Green Millennium by Fritz Liber. Crazy space hallucinogenic drug cats that glow green. And a story of the future where somebody is tracking down one of these cats because they make them feel so good. This is, in my opinion, what the kind of wacky, surrealistic science fiction is aiming to be. This is surrealistic science fiction that works really well, and oftentimes I feel like surrealistic science fiction can fall flat, but this one didn't. This is so much fun. Number 23 is Fritz Leiber's Conjure Wife. This was a wild story about witches being married to men and helping with their careers. And as the book goes on, we slowly begin to realize that all women practice a form of witchcraft. It's really a wild read. It does get a little bit into workplace drama, which I usually don't like, but I will admit the bias in the sense that this is all about workplace drama in academia and working in a college setting, which is where I've spent most of my adult life, so it made more sense to me. That's just my own personal bias. Some people might not like the workplace stuff, and if this wasn't a workplace that I was interested in, I would have maybe put it with the other ones lower down, the other kind of workplace drama science fiction that I read, but this one really kicked a lot of butt. I enjoyed it. Next up is The Claw of the Conciliator by Gene Wolfe. I had a lot of fun with this one. I felt like I was able to let go a lot of the problems I had with Shadow of the Torturer, the first one in this. I do want to say that in ranking these, I feel like I'm ranking a novel that I haven't finished. I know these were released in 4 novels, but in my opinion, this is really truly one novel, one story. So we might see it rank higher in 2025 than it does for now, because I got to read 2 more of these. So I haven't even finished this story yet. I don't know all the twists, and a lot of people say that reading Gene Wolfe begins on your second read through, and that makes a lot of sense to me as I'm going through these. But this was wild, and of course Gene Wolfe's prose is insanely fun. What I remember most from this are the plays and stories, the wild metaphor of the Minotaur in the maze, but the Minotaur is this old battleship. It's wild. Number 21 is Ubica, a book that was somebody... I watch a lot of Sci-Fi BookTube, and somebody put this as number 1, and this is not a bad book to go on a list for number 1. It is not number 1 for me, and really truly the only reason for that is because the time travel at the end doesn't do it for me. I'm not a massive fan of time travel. However, the first half of this book is Dickian goodness, straight up. Some of the best Philip K. Dick humor I've read thus far is the first half of this book. Him arguing with his door because he doesn't have a nickel to put in it for it to open. Absolutely insanely cool. Really, really incredible book. Worth a read. All right, we're going to jump genre here a little bit. Number 20 is The Shining by Stephen King. This is my actual first edition copy. Not in the best of condition, but I am glad to have a first edition copy. If I was channeling or talking to my teenage self, this would probably be number one. This was one of my favorite books of all time. The recent reread I did was really fun, but at times it felt a little bloated. It felt like it went on a little bit. Still an incredible story about a haunted hotel. And there are a couple of things that inspired this that I absolutely love as well. We'll get into those further on. But yeah, this is a solid read. I can't decide if this or it is my favorite Stephen King, but it's one of those. Solid stuff. Sticking with the horror, number 19, Julia by Peter Straub. A lot of you are screaming at the TV right now, how could I put Peter Straub over Stephen King? And I get it. I get it. There's a difference here. I believe that this book, to me, had characters, or a character, Julia, reacting to being haunted in the most realistic way possible. The constant questioning of whether or not she was mad really worked for me in this one. It was really, really creepy. Not my favorite horror read of 2024, but damn close. Really, really great book. Interestingly enough, I've tried to read Ghost Story many times by Peter Straub because that is considered his best, and because I grew up loving the movie Ghost Story. And every time I start it, I DNF it. And I DNF it near the beginning. It has a strange beginning where it seems like somebody's kidnapped a kid, and it's very, very weird. But one of these days I do plan on getting through it. I will get through it because I've heard that the more you read, the better and the better it gets. So I just need to push through that very long opening and really get into the meat of that story, because I've heard the movie doesn't even touch it. Number 18 gets us back to science fiction in a big way, and that is the Anthology, the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. This is what I started the channel with, just going over stories from this anthology. If you are not a sci-fi reader and are wondering, like, what is the Golden Age like? All you got to do is grab this. This, to me, feels like... Reading this felt like the first time I watched Star Trek. This is really, truly kick-ass space exploration, science fiction. Not all of it space exploration, but a lot of it is. This is the kind of science fiction that was made to blow your mind with ideas and science and the crazy technology that man would have in the future. Great, great stuff. I can't recommend this enough. If you're just looking to have a good time with science fiction, this is the book for you. Next up is a book that I don't consider a science fiction book, but very much a science fiction writer, and that's J.G. Ballard's Concrete Island. What a wild trip this was. This guy kind of reminds me of Kafka. This is about a successful businessman who has all the troubles of the world that finds himself stranded in a weird part of the freeway. So he's completely surrounded by fast driving cars and everything, and starts to survive on that small island in the middle of all these freeways. And we begin to question as the book goes on if he really wants to leave or if he is completely embracing this new life. Ballard is an incredible writer. It's very, very literary. And I believe that he should be mentioned in academic circles way more than he is. Or maybe I just never found him. I don't know. I know I read many, many years ago and probably in school, The Drowned Giant. But I think that's the name of the short story. But that's the only Ballard that I had read. And reading this, incredible. Really, really a good time. Something I would have loved during my undergrad and all throughout college. If I would have discovered this, I think I would have loved it. I have to thank the Outlaw Bookseller for pushing J.G. Ballard so much, because that's why I grabbed it and read it. Number 16 is The Man Who Awoke by Lawrence Manning. This is one of the stories that I just grabbed off my shelf when I was like, I just want to start reading science fiction. I grabbed it up and was blown away. This was written in the early 30s by a Canadian science fiction writer, and it's about a man that sleeps, I think he sleeps 5,000 years at a time, and jumps into the future. This is the most spot-on look at the future I think I have ever seen. I can't tell you, and it's a lot of short stories. They were published as short stories. That this is kind of a fix-up novel, but I'll tell you, the evolution of humans' way of thinking makes such good sense in this book as he goes farther and farther, and the ending just blew my mind. Plus, I think this is the earliest version of the Matrix concept that I've read, where humans are hooked up to machines living kind of their perfect dream lives. This is one that I try to recommend every chance I get, because I believe this should be a classic, and not a lot of people have read it or heard of it. I would love this to pick up. Number 15 is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. Man, I had a good time with this story. I'm going to read so much more Wyndham. This was incredible. So wild. I'm eventually going to read Day of the Triffids, and I think Virgil would like to read that one with me. So mid-year, I'll probably jump on to that. Smart, ahead of his time writer. The scariest invasion story I've ever read. This one never drops the ball. It's incredible. It could be much higher up on this list. And of course, we have to remember that this is just my personal reading experience that's ranking these. Yeah, I mean, we're to the point now that every one of these novels could be number ones. They're all so incredible. Number 14 is The Hole in the Zero by M.K. Joseph. Man, what a journey this was. Wild. This is some really strange hallucinatory writing that you have to do your best to keep a grip on, or it'll just throw you out. And I like writing like this, where it seems like it's nonsense, but if you pay close attention, you'll start to understand what is being said and what is happening. And this is one of those that is so weird but pays off if you really pay close attention to it. I read this one with Ira, and it was a blast. Really incredible choice. First off, Ira, for choosing this one. Well done. I really loved it. Back to horror for my number 13, which makes sense, and that is Carmela by J. Sheridan LaFanu. I went and saw Nosferatu. It was pretty fun, but I have to say, I'm pretty tired of the Dracula story, and I feel like a lot of people treat it as if it's the only vampire story, and there's so many others. In fact, this one predates Dracula, and in my opinion is kind of the first, well, it's not even true. It's one of the earliest versions of the erotic vampire. Really incredible. I would love to see a movie version of this that follows the book very, very closely. That said, Robert Eggers' Vampires, or Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, was a very scary vampire. But I did have some issues with the film. That doesn't matter. Number 12 is Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, the Strugatsky brothers. Like I said, I've read so much stuff this year that we're getting to number ones. Everything I do from here on out, in my opinion, could be a number one. And people are going to question, like, how would you put this over that? And that was why this was so hard. So I'm going to say again, like a broken record, this is just my reading experience with these. My God, this was an incredible story. Absolutely genius. And I liked that instead of the story being told from the perspective of the scientists, it was told from the perspective of people living around the zone that were living in bone-crushing poverty and using the zone and trips into the zone in order to stay alive and make money. Really, really brilliant stuff. And number 11 is The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. I know a lot of people are saying, how could you put that number 1 at number 11? I get it. I don't want to keep repeating myself. I haven't read all 4 of these, so I don't feel like I can properly rank them until I have finished the story. This was a very confusing read for me, and so much of it has stuck with me, especially the mirrors and the way that I think it's him and Dorcas discussing how to the layers of looking at the world. This can be a very interesting first read for people, and I enjoyed it because I like chaotic, weird prose that doesn't make a lot of sense. The hard part for me was, of course, trying to find that key, and the more of these that I read, the more I am able to find the key of unraveling the riddle that is the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. So yeah, this was a very fun read for me, and I think it would go up higher after I've done and do a reread on it. Okay, that is it for the middle bit. So thank you very much for watching this. Expect the top 10 tomorrow.